The observation deck of the Wandering Claw had never been designed for comfort. It was a military vessel, after all, a Kethran dreadnought built for warfare, not for the peculiar needs of a single human diplomat. Yet here sat Mira Hale, slumped in a metal chair that was far too large for her frame, her head tilted at an angle that would surely cause pain when she woke. She had fallen asleep during the 3rd hour of her shift monitoring the star charts. No one had noticed at first. The Kethran crew had learned to give the human her space. She was, after all, the first of her kind to set foot on their vessel, and none of them quite knew what to make of her. The Kethrans were apex predators from a world where mercy was a foreign concept, where strength determined survival, and where the weak were culled before they could become a burden. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in sleek fur that ranged from obsidian black to deep crimson, with retractable claws that could shred steel and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. They were engineered by evolution to kill. Myra Hale was 5'4", soft-skinned, and had once cried during a council meeting when discussing the famine on Proxima 7. The cultural exchange program had seemed like madness to both sides. But it was Trick who noticed her first. The cub, barely 3 cycles old, equivalent to perhaps 8 human years, had been prowling the corridors when he spotted the strange, small creature through the observation deck window. Trick's mother was a bridge officer, and he'd been told 1,000 times to stay away from the human. She was fragile, they said. She could be broken by accident. But she looked uncomfortable. Trick pressed his nose to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. The human's arms were wrapped around herself, and even through the window he could see the tiny bumps rising on her exposed skin. His species didn't feel cold the way she did. Their homeworld was a frozen wasteland compared to Earth, but his mother had explained that humans needed warmth. The observation deck's environmental controls had malfunctioned again. It was the 3rd time this week. Without hesitation, Trick bounded away, his claws clicking against the metal floor. Myra dreamed of home. She dreamed of her apartment in New Seattle, of coffee that actually tasted like coffee and not recycled nutrients, of her sister's laugh and the weight of her childhood cat purring on her chest. She dreamed of warmth. The cold had been creeping in for hours, but exhaustion had claimed her before discomfort could wake her. 3 months aboard the Wandering Claw had taught her that sleep was a luxury to be seized whenever possible. The Kethrans operated on a 28-hour cycle, and her circadian rhythm had never quite adjusted. In her dreams, something soft settled over her shoulders. Trick had returned with his sleeping blanket, a thick weave of thermal fibers that his mother had made for him. It was his most precious possession, smelling of home and safety. He draped it carefully over the human's shoulders, his movements slow and deliberate, the way his mother moved when handling fragile equipment. The blanket was far too large for Mira, pooling around the chair and dragging on the floor. Trick sat back on his haunches, tilting his head. She was still shivering. One blanket wasn't enough. The cub's ears perked forward, and he raced off again. By the time Trick returned with his brother Shen and sister Kara, Mira was buried under 4 blankets. Shen carried the heavy quilt from their mother's quarters, an act that would surely result in punishment, but his littermate's earnest explanation about the cold human had convinced him. Kara brought 2 decorative throws from the recreation room, ignoring the confused stares of the adult warriors. "She's still cold," Trick insisted, his voice a high-pitched warble in the Kethran dialect. "Look, her body makes those strange vibrations. Humans are weak," Shen agreed, though there was no malice in his tone. It was simply fact. "We must bring more." The 3 cubs scattered like a tactical unit. When Mira began to wake, she was aware of 3 things. First, she was warm. Properly, genuinely warm for the first time in weeks. Second, she couldn't move. Something heavy pinned her to the chair. Third, she could hear. Purring? Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim light of the observation deck. The star field beyond the viewport swirled in familiar patterns, but that wasn't what made her freeze. She was buried. Blankets of every color and texture imaginable covered her from shoulders to feet. Some clearly military issue, others ornate and ceremonial, still others small and worn with use. The pile had to weigh 30 pounds at least. And surrounding her chair, arranged in a protective semicircle, were 7 Kethran cubs. Trick sat closest, his golden eyes fixed on her face. When she met his gaze, his ears twitched forward. "You stopped shivering," he said in halting, heavily accented English. "This is good, yes?" Myra's throat tightened. She'd been briefed extensively on Kethran culture, their emphasis on strength, their ritualistic displays of dominance, their complete lack of sentiment toward weakness. Cubs were taught from birth that survival meant self-reliance, that pack hierarchy was absolute, that compassion was a liability. Yet here they sat, having given her every blanket they possessed. "Yes," she managed, her voice thick. "This is very good, thank you, Trick." The cub's chest swelled with pride. Trick brought the first blanket. He looked at his companions. But the others helped. "We are a good pack." Shen, larger and darker than his brother, rumbled in agreement. "Humans are strange. They need many blankets to not die." "Not die is important," Kara added solemnly, her rust-colored fur bristling slightly. "Mother says the human is here for cultural exchange. If she dies from cold, the exchange ends badly." Myra couldn't help it, she laughed. It started as a chuckle but grew into full breathless laughter that made the cub's ears flatten in confusion. When she finally composed herself, she reached out slowly, carefully, and rested her hand on Trick's head. The entire group went rigid. Physical contact between species was strictly forbidden. Touch was intimate among Kethrans, reserved for family and mates, but Trick didn't pull away. His eyes widened, and then slowly, tentatively he leaned into her palm. "You are good cubs," Myra said softly, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "The best pack I've ever seen." When Commander Vesh discovered her cubs had raided half the ship's textile storage, she'd been prepared to deliver a scathing reprimand. But she stopped short at the observation deck door, watching through the window as the humans sat surrounded by Kethran young, teaching them earth songs in their broken English while wrapped in a mountain of blankets. Trick was curled at Mira Hale's feet, his eyes half closed in contentment, his most precious blanket draped across her lap. Vesh turned away without entering. Perhaps, she thought, there were different kinds of strength. And perhaps humans understood something about survival that Kethrans had forgotten.